Obedience doesn't always come from force. It's usually shaped quietly, beneath awareness, in moments where logic gets bypassed and instinct takes over. People assume they decide things freely, but behavioral science shows that's not how human choice works. The brain is constantly responding to subtle cues, words, tone, body language, silence. And when those cues are used deliberately, someone can make you comply without ever raising their voice. This video isn't about manipulation for fun. It's about the mechanics of control that feel so natural. Most people don't even notice they've lost their autonomy until long after they've said yes. The 10 psychological tricks in this video short-circuit rational thought and create instant submission. Whether you want to use this knowledge, protect yourself from it, or simply understand how obedience really works, these are the tactics behind what most people confuse with charisma. Now let's begin. 1. Anchor authority through micro-commands. Compliance starts small. The human brain does not evaluate every request with equal effort. It looks for mental shortcuts. And when it finds someone issuing small, simple directives with confidence, like "hand me that," or "listen to this part," it begins to treat that person as a decision maker worth following. What makes micro-commands effective is not the content, but the momentum they create. Each small agreement lays the groundwork for the next one to seem natural, even inevitable, until obedience is happening without conscious resistance. What most don't realize is that the first yes, even to a harmless prompt, alters the internal posture of the listener. They shift without meaning to into a receptive state. They aren't evaluating whether to obey. They're waiting for the next cue. And once someone has entered that state, their critical thinking softens. They don't want to break the flow. They want to maintain the rhythm that's been established. That's when obedience stops being a choice and becomes a behavioral pattern. 2. Hijack their focus with strategic eye contact. Most people underestimate how physically demanding direct eye contact can be when it's timed with precision. The human brain interprets an unwavering gaze as a signal of dominance. And when someone speaks while holding that gaze, the message is processed as more serious, more urgent, and more true, even if it isn't. It doesn't matter what's being said. What matters is that it's being said with the kind of focus that triggers submission in the person being watched. This works not because eye contact is inherently persuasive, but because it disrupts the balance of control. People instinctively break eye contact when they feel pressure. And whoever holds their gaze without flinching communicates unspoken authority. It creates a sense that the speaker isn't looking for validation, isn't afraid of rejection, and isn't going to adjust their stance to make others more comfortable. That kind of stillness carries psychological weight, and it influences decision-making faster than logic ever could. 3. Use urgency language to bypass logical resistance. There's a part of the brain that understands language, and there's a deeper part that responds to threat. Urgency words like "now," "before it's gone," or "you'll miss your chance" don't just convey timing. They trigger survival systems that rush people into action. When spoken with a calm tone, but with sharp phrasing, these words create the illusion that waiting is dangerous, and that hesitation will cost something the listener cannot afford to lose. It's not about yelling or exaggerating. It's about inserting friction into the decision-making process by implying there won't be another opportunity. The brain doesn't pause to evaluate when urgency hits. It moves, it complies, it obeys, not out of agreement, but out of discomfort. The mistake most people make is thinking they need to be loud to create pressure, when in reality, a soft voice paired with urgency phrases is even more disorienting, because it feels like someone knows something you don't, and you don't want to be left behind. 4. Deploy scarcity psychology. Make yourself a once-in-a-lifetime decision. When people believe that something won't be available again, its perceived value increases immediately. Scarcity doesn't just make something appealing, it makes it urgent, emotional, and worth irrational decisions. That's why when someone positions themselves as limited, exceptional, or on the verge of disappearing, obedience follows quickly, not because they've proven themselves, but because the brain responds to rarity like a threat to survival. Grab it or regret it. Scarcity isn't about lying or faking exclusivity. It's about being deliberate with access. When you make it clear that your time, your approval, or your presence is not a given, people start working to secure it. The rules flip. Instead of you asking to be chosen, others start proving they deserve a chance. It makes your yes feel valuable and your no feel devastating. That imbalance drives people to obey out of desperation, to avoid being shut out. 5. Layer commands inside casual speech. The most manipulative commands aren't the ones shouted. They're the ones delivered in the middle of a sentence, wrapped in everyday language where the listener's guard is down. This trick works because people rarely evaluate casual conversation with suspicion. When someone's relaxed, they stop scanning for manipulation, and their brain becomes more suggestible. A well-placed phrase like, "You'll feel better when you," or "as you decide this today," installs a command without triggering resistance. This isn't hypnosis, it's sentence structure. When a command is hidden inside what seems like a harmless observation or a soft suggestion, it bypasses the filter that normally blocks persuasion. The listener doesn't hear an order. They hear a statement that assumes they've already agreed. And in trying to match that assumption, they begin to comply before they even realize it. 6. Mirror their breathing to hack their nervous system. When you subtly match the rhythm of someone's breath, you create an invisible link between your body and theirs, not through words or persuasion, but through the most primal signal of trust we have: physiological synchronicity. This kind of mirroring bypasses the analytical mind completely and speaks directly to the nervous system, because when someone sees that you are breathing in harmony with them, their body unconsciously feels understood and safe, even if they don't consciously register why. What most people overlook is that trust doesn't always come from the right sentence or the right compliment. It comes from feeling physically regulated in someone else's presence. And breath is the clearest way to send that signal without having to say anything at all. Once that regulation is established, you can begin to slow your own breath just slightly. And because the mirror reflex is already in place, they will follow, relaxing further into your pace without resistance. The true power here is that once you're the one setting the rhythm of their breath, you are also the one setting the emotional tone of the interaction, meaning they are more likely to follow your suggestions, agree with your opinions, and comply with your requests. Not because they've been convinced, but because their body has already decided that you're safe to follow. 7. Break their predictable patterns. Confusion creates instant obedience. Most people operate through daily behavioral loops, routines of speech, motion, and reaction that require no conscious attention. And when you interrupt one of those patterns in an unexpected way, you create a moment of mental disorientation where the person no longer has a script to follow. And in that tiny gap, they look for the nearest signal of certainty to follow, which is almost always the person who just disrupted them. This doesn't require a big dramatic action. It can be as simple as changing your tone mid-conversation, asking a question they weren't expecting, or using an awkward silence when they expect a response. The point is to short-circuit their autopilot response and make them reach for structure, which you then provide by giving them a clear, direct cue to follow. That's how confusion becomes compliance. You shake the ground beneath them and then offer your hand. 8. Create emotional peaks, then anchor yourself as the solution. The brain does not treat all emotional experiences equally. Heightened emotional states, whether joy, panic, embarrassment, or awe, make the mind more open to suggestion, because in those moments, the usual filters of judgment are bypassed in favor of survival, connection, or intensity. And whoever happens to be present during that peak gets tied to the memory itself. That's why emotional timing matters more than logical sequencing when it comes to influence. If you create or simply position yourself during one of these moments, a meaningful compliment during vulnerability, a solution during panic, a sense of calm in chaos, the brain stores not just what you said, but who you were in that moment, and that association becomes harder to question later on. This isn't about being helpful or insightful. It's about attaching yourself to the emotional imprint of the experience so that they can't separate the feeling from your presence. 9. Trigger their fear of loss. Threaten subtle withdrawal. Most decisions are not made based on what we want to gain. They are made in panic over what we might lose, which is why the most effective obedience triggers often come not from reward, but from the quiet suggestion that something might be taken away, especially if that something is approval, validation, attention, or access to a relationship the person depends on for their identity or emotional grounding. You don't need to threaten or beg to use this. You simply need to pull back slightly, reduce your attention, change your tone, or delay your response. And the person on the receiving end begins to feel a gap where your certainty used to be. And that gap causes discomfort, strong enough to make them do what it takes to close it. That's not conscious manipulation. That's the nervous system responding to perceived abandonment. Once someone fears that your approval or availability might not be secure, their internal motivation shifts from exploration to preservation. And they'll comply with rules, requests, or emotional dynamics they normally wouldn't tolerate. Not because they agree, but because the threat of being removed from the connection feels more dangerous than compromising their own boundaries for a sense of safety. 10. Speak with strategic pauses to force them into emotional vulnerability. There's something unnerving about silence in the middle of a sentence, especially when it comes after a suggestion or during a question, because it shifts the emotional burden onto the listener to fill the gap. And in that discomfort, people often agree just to end the tension. When you speak with pauses placed intentionally at high-stakes moments, you are no longer just talking. You're creating suspense that makes people vulnerable to your next word. A well-placed silence doesn't signal uncertainty. It signals control because you are comfortable with the discomfort it creates. And that confidence communicates power that most people instinctively respond to by softening or yielding. This is especially effective with people who are anxious or approval-seeking, because the pause becomes a kind of emotional interrogation they feel the need to resolve by submitting or complying. If you have made it this far, comment down below with the word 100% to confirm that you have received the knowledge from this video. For more interesting topics, make sure you watch the recommended video that you see on the screen right now. Thanks for watching.